Good afternoon. This is Zigmund, the Zigmund Reichenbach Show, episode 2. Just me, rocking with you live, and excited to bring to you another live stream. If you don't know, the Zigmund Reichenbach Show is a place to talk about politics, philosophy, and to get to know one another as a community and friends and exchange of thoughts and ideas. So if you are on, make sure to go to zigmundreichenbach.com to follow along with some of the past work I've done. But today I will be discussing things that I intend to write, things that will be coming up in the next week. So if you're excited for that, make sure to go to zigmundreichenbach.com and subscribe to the newsletter. Meantime, uh, next Tuesday at 8:30, we will have another broadcast of this show. So always make sure to tune in then. I think we should have a bigger one than what we got today. In fact, we may have a smaller show. But that's all right. We're going to keep rolling on here. Our four main topics for today are culture wars, the founders' theory of democracy, if they even had one, limited government, and how both parties should indeed be committed to limited government, and socialist has lazy customers. I think that's a fun way to think about it. If you have a marketplace of ideas, then it would seem in many cases socialists are the laziest consumer of them all. So we will hop right to it. The one thing that I wanted to discuss on the show was culture wars. We didn't get to it on the Tuesday at 8:30 version of the show, but I wanted to bring it up because it seems like there's a cultural fascination with these alleged culture wars. But are there really any culture wars, or are they just shadows in the wall of Plato's cave? Likewise, what is there to gain by participating in a so-called culture war? And should more be done privately to win this so-called culture war? Well, I think if we look at it and yes, good to see Emily. I hope you are staying active here this Sunday. I know that's well, a lot of people were out celebrating various holidays. We had a good time at church. But yeah, just wanted to discuss this important topic here. And the culture wars that I mentioned are the culture wars a shadow on the wall of Plato's cave. In other words, if you study the philosophy of Plato, what he uses to help justify his theory is this idea that there is a reality that only the few know. And he makes a allegory of the cave where he says that there are some individuals trapped inside this cave where they only see the shadows of the light coming down upon them. And it is therefore incumbent upon those who see the light to tell those folks who are trapped in the shadows and seeing the reflections of reality, what it is that's going on. And that's what I wanted to talk about in terms of the culture wars. Is this just a shadow on the wall? Is this a projection of reality? Is this some kind of ephemeral electronic facade when it comes to reality? My answer to the question I do indeed believe is yes, because if we look at what's going on in the very nature of our culture, people are quite obviously not at war with each other when you go outside to the supermarket or if you go out to the mall. Obviously, people are not fighting, engaging in any kind of chaotic behavior. But it does seem to likewise that people believe that there is this culture war, despite the fact that our ordinary observation would clearly tell us there is no such thing. So why is that? Well, I think that there are various power interests at play who want to create this false projection of reality in order to stir up conflict. And I think when we use war metaphors, that is the chief and primary way in which people stir up conflict that's not there. For example, we had the war on drugs in the past. We had the war on poverty. We had another other presidential declarations of so-called war. Now we have the media claiming that there is a culture war. And again, this is all apparently to stir up conflict that just, quite frankly, does not exist. And so that's why I think it's incumbent that we challenge ourselves and challenge other people to ask them, well, what is this so-called culture war? Because actually, I think if people buy in to this false narrative that we are indeed dealing with a culture war, then people may be inclined to be more combative towards other people than what they ordinarily would be. In fact, I just seen something on Twitter that pointed to this very fact that I mentioned, where analogously to what it is that I'm saying here, Nicolas Maduro on social media had what looked to be a strong social media following, but in reality, it was just a bunch of bots creating this cultural illusion of making it seem like he had a real consensus and support that, when you broke things down, didn't really exist. And I think when it comes to the conditions where what we're dealing with here in our culture, I think the very same thing applies, where folks are trying to get us to buy into this idea of a culture war, so we end up carrying water for whatever special interest that there is. Where if we think we're crusading for freedom, we end up crusading for the advertising industry or the entertainment complex, or some cases social justice for folks on the other side of the aisle. And I think that, forgive me, I think that when it comes to the de-escalation of this conflict, it's incumbent that we reject this idea of a so-called culture war, because if we don't, we're going to have that needless hostility. And it's one of those things that if people believe it's true, then it in some ways is indeed true, or it is indeed going on. Whereas if we simply resist by rejecting this false culture war narrative, we can get back to a place where we can have more civil discussion, deeper conversation, and a greater overall dialogue. So I would encourage you guys to join me in rejecting this false idea of a culture war. But also, we should also think, let's say then that we weren't involved in some kind of culture war per se. Now, if that was indeed the case, is picking about it on Facebook going to advance whatever mission we have, or is it going to get us picked off or kicked off in many cases? I think that the case could really be made that if there is a culture war, which I don't think there is, but if there was one, that's something that the terms of victory would be behind the scenes. So in other words, I will reset here. This is the Zigmund Reichenbach Show. Thank you all for joining us. Episode 2. We are discussing culture wars, founders' theory of democracy, limited government, and socialist has lazy customers. And just in the middle of discussing culture wars and making the suggestion that if there is such a thing as a culture war, it's not going to be won online. In fact, the majority of what's behind these alleged culture wars, or so-called wokeism or corporate speak, is indeed things that have been done off the internet and offline, and actually taking people's time, energy, and treasure and investing that into building infrastructure so that their ideas can better win. So if people want to win the culture wars, which again I think don't exist, but even if you wanted to win and you did indeed buy into that idea, I think it's incumbent that you spend some time offline, or you spend time constructing things and building up the people that you believe deserve to be built up and invested in, so that way more people can live a better, more prosperous life in the future. Lastly, the last subject of discussion, I guess we got three people. That's always exciting, and I hope y'all are having a great time. If you are listening and you are on this Facebook Live, please like and drop a comment and make sure to subscribe to zigmundreichenbach.com. Now that we have a small following here, but it's really the support of loyal individuals like you that will get the message of what it is that we are doing out there, because there's simply no other group that is discussing politics, philosophy, or really any big idea of substance with anybody for free. So we 1000% appreciate your support. I know that we have the support of Miss Emily Brown. Thank you, Emily, for always being such a trooper and dedicated. What it is that I'm trying to do, I know some other folks are trying to help advance the different things that we're talking about on our commentary page. If you're on social media, go to Zigmund or search Zigmund Reichenbach commentator. That's where you can stay up to date on our latest news articles and commentary on current events and join our community that way. And more importantly, if you go to patreon.com/Zigmund Reichenbach, you can make a donation so that way we can reach even more people than before. Because if we do not advocate for our own ideas, the ideas of others will be advocated through us. And so that's why I need your help. I need your support, and any contribution would 1000% be beneficial. Lastly, in our discussion here of the culture wars, the last question I wanted to ask or discuss is, what is there to gain by participating in a culture war? Obviously, if there's a war, that implies that there must indeed be participants. And are we all participants in this war? And if so, were we drafted into it, to use the metaphor, or are we voluntary participants? And if we were drafted into it, then there's nothing that we can do about it, and therefore maybe it's not important that we fight this alleged war. Or alternatively, if we are choosing to fight this alleged culture war, why? What is it that we get if we do indeed win? We'll say, for example, soldiers in World War I and World War II, aside from just being great emblematic figures of the fighting spirit of the United States, many of them actually profited personally. They received substantial financial benefits, they received acclaim, and all that is indeed justified. But if we're in a culture war and we're fighting, then are we going to get the same level of acclaim or cultural respect? I don't think so. And with that being the case, then maybe there is indeed no purpose in participating in any culture war, and therefore we should disarm ourselves of this quite clearly defective cultural metaphor. Or what are your guys' thoughts? We'd be interested in hearing from you. Are you a crusader for the major culture war fight, or are you something else? Are you a contributor to our Republican nation, or do you make a contribution to culture by taking direct political action, door knocking, making calls, having conversations with people? Be interested in hearing from you on that topic. Interestingly and funny enough, it looks like my glasses are pulling into the green screen. That's kind of funny. But so we got through subject one here, the culture wars. And next week we do hope to have either Christian Watson or Josh or Chris back for a Sunday show. We will again have a show on Tuesday at 8:30. But today it's me going solo, ensuring that no matter what, I don't give up on this project and still have something for it all, even if nobody appears to be listening at this point in time. We still have many years to go and many days ahead of us. So we will indeed continue to grow and continue to think. Next thing that I wanted to cover and what's worth mentioning here is the founders' theory of democracy. Did the founders think about democracy at all? Well, you read the Federalist, it appears the case is no. The founders never thought about democracy, and if they did, they only thought negatively of it, or they thought that it led to mobocracy, which was the root cause and source for tyranny, or at least one of them, similar to the tyranny that they dealt with from King George. And so that's what I wanted to call into question here is, okay, did they think of democracy? And if they did, what was it that they did think about democracy? And as it turns out, the impulse by the founders for democracy was indeed limited. In fact, if you look at what they actually call for, they limit anything that claims to be democratic to the House. So they're in the Senate, the senators were to be elected by the individual states. Judges, of course, were to be appointed, and the president was to be elected collectively by all states. Forgive me, senators were to be elected by state legislators, and the presidents were to be elected collectively by the individual states. So, of course, the founders never articulated a theory of democracy, but if they did, it would work something like this. First, it would be to preserve democracy through giving people power directly, because, of course, they were not contemporary European social theorists. Instead, for the founders, the need for democracy was limited, which, of course, was limited to one branch of the federal government and 4 members of the state legislators. So to start off, if the founders had a theory of democracy, it was limited and not total control, because as the founders knew, and as we can observe quite clearly, when any one group gets total control over anything, it rarely results in anything beneficial, or the correct decision is rarely made. You can see that in the social stimulus package proposed by the Biden administration, where one party hijacked Congress by using this maneuver that allowed them to pass a vast spending package with little input from Republicans that included all kinds of bad spending that will not amount to anything consequential, similar to Obama's shovel-ready jobs that were indeed, if they were shovel-ready, they're not ready anymore. This turned out to be a huge waste of money. But all that to say that if the founders did have a theory of democracy, it would follow the following criterion. The representative in the U.S. House and the representatives in the state legislators would best articulate the wishes for the people. This is much different than people articulating the wishes of the people. One, because if you spend time talking to large groups of people, many are not even aware of what it is their wishes are. But two, the thinking is that representatives would have the time, capability, and know-how to best articulate what it is that their individual constituents want. And out of all the people being chosen as a representative, they would have the best polls of the thinking of a large number of people. Compare that to Athenian democracy. In Athenian democracy, all the citizens were chosen randomly. So just imagine if there's all kinds of chaos in government now. Imagine if you were living in Athens, where it's a random group of people voting on something. I don't think that I would trust that, but that was indeed democracy, and direct democracy at that. But also, the Athenians would have no immediate way to survey the interests and needs of the individual people in their community. They were chosen by lot or at random. And so therefore, with all that randomness, you're not going to have any one person who was intentionally chosen to be the best mouthpiece of the people. And so you had that inherent effect in original Athenian democracy. But also, what this would also imply is that a representative would be responsible for finding out what the wishes of the people are, one, articulating those views, two, and then three, passing legislation representing those views, or not passing legislation if that's what the wishes of the people are. And so the founders' theory of democracy is, of course, very much different than what it is that we are told democracy is. It's radically different than what Democrats, for example, say. For Democrats, democracy is anything that they say is what the people want, even if indeed the people don't want it. And if you really think hard about the issue of what democracy means, you'll come to understand that even the things that representatives think that people want, things like a bunch of government spending, the long-term people don't want, because the second order effect of that is vast government inflation that has no end in sight. And so all that was supposed to be corrected by the Senate, but the Senate has since largely become demagogues because of the repeal of the 17th Amendment. So in short here, the founders term democracy wasn't a catch-all for politicians doing whatever they want because they appeal to the people. That's what democracy means now, is politicians doing whatever they want to get reelected, to control people, to make money by just appealing to the vanity of the masses. Instead, for the founders, democracy was a necessary element of a well-functioning political system, but not the entirety of it. So what's interesting is that if you look at the original design of Congress, it was never designed, or just our system in general, it's never designed for any one type of person to ever get the upper hand. It's never designed for democracy, for example, to triumph over the aristocratic element of the Senate, where gentlemen would be inclined to have longer terms, but to also be more thoughtful than what a representative would be. That's why senators have longer terms than members of those in the House, because they are expected to be, forgive me, more enlightened and knowledgeable than their younger colleagues, and therefore in possession of greater wisdom that would allow them to correct the errors of the popularly elected House. So democracy was never designed to triumph over the Senate. It was designed to be one half of a chamber that's one third of an overall system between the executive branch and the judiciary. So in that case, really, their democracy is limited to, if you count the two separate chambers of Congress as separate chambers, then it was supposed to be 25% of what it is that our system was supposed to be. But that brings us into a good discussion of the other point that I wanted to make. The point that I wanted to make is that both parties should be ideologically committed to limited government, particularly Democrats, whose appeal to the people is supposed to reign supreme. Well, if that is indeed the case, that Democrats are supposed to appeal to the people, then that would mean that they have an obligation to neutralize the powers of the administrative state, because that's what it means to be a Democrat. Cool. Looks like we have Jordan. Jordan Liz Lasnewski is watching. If you're watching, Miss Jordan, make sure to tell Mr. Peterman that I said hello. And then I hope you guys are all doing well. I'm still doing small political talk, and I guess this will be a good point to reset, if you are on it, of what we're talking about. So I'm just talking about limited government and how even Democrats are supposed to be committed to the very principle of limited government. What that would mean is having Democrats use their power to neutralize the administrative state. And what the administrative state is, it's a group of unelected bureaucrats who pass quote unquote rules without much public input and without democratic oversight. So there's no way to know whether or not the rules they're passing truly represent the wishes of the people. And for anybody, this should be fundamentally concerning. Again, particularly Democrats and Republicans and Democrats on this issue should take should join hands and join together to limit the government. Emily Brown says Nancy Pelosi needs limited. Well, I know why people say that. It's interesting. If somebody like Pelosi were term limited, then I think what you would have is you probably have somebody worse falling in her place and somebody even less competent. So I don't think it's automatically the case that just getting people out of office is the answer. What I do think the answer is, though, is a bipartisan consensus. I don't think that bipartisan consensus always has to mean more government, as it has for the last 100 plus years. I think in this case, it ought to mean limited government. Republicans and Democrats should be able to agree the administrative state must go. Democrats themselves are committed to less government. If their appeal is fundamentally to the people, they must support limited government. You can't have unelected bureaucrats doing jobs instead of Congress. That's fundamentally wrong, and it's a violation of alleged Democrat values. Unless they don't have those values anymore, in which case they shouldn't be pretending there's something that they're not. So I say here in the article that the administrative state mainly serves to further create a class of DC elite to write rules, which have the same effect as laws at the expense of democratic input. Likewise, although I suggest that both Republicans and Democrats should indeed work together to minimize the effects of the administrative state in a way that's more democratic, so they do have a procedure in place to limit the administrative state called the Congressional Review Act, but that's hardly ever invoked, and it's really not strong enough to allow for the sort of democratic input that you would think Democrats themselves would indeed lobby for. You need something like a sunset provision, so that way if the administrative state, if they pass rules that are not agreed to by the bill of the people, sunset, or a bill that through a concurrent resolution, which means that the House and the Senate both agree that a regulation can be repealed, then that would be superior to what the Congressional Review Act. At least I think so. I don't think the powers of the Congressional Review Act are that for it. Well, it's also good to see you here, Phil. It's been a long time, buddy, and I hope you can chime in on this subject. Basically, what I'm asking here, Phil, is whether or not we're just pointing out that both parties should agree to limited government, even Democrats. I know that they're painted as big government socialists, and perhaps in some ways they are, and that's okay enough. But what they ought to agree to is limiting the administrative state. Emily Brown here says, no, I mean, limited everything. Well, I think, Emily, with Miss Pelosi's age, she is getting to be quite limited on her own, and therefore needs no further restriction. So Phil says sunset is a great solution. Yeah, no, that's right. And, I know that a lot of people, or perhaps some people listening here, are libertarians or third party people, and that's the kind of politics that they have. But I think it would be beneficial to folks who are in third party or minor party or any party aside from the two largest parties, and they would even benefit from calling for anybody to support limited government. That's the principles of all parties so far. I don't think any party aside from maybe the Communist Party, and I don't even think communists necessarily explicitly advocate for big government, but I do know that for all three parties, it must indeed be the case that government must be limited. Otherwise, they're not living up to their party name, which is problematic enough. Phil says this is the natural solution, but the well is so poisoned that it's become rather rare to see folks willing to work together. That's indeed true, Phil. I certainly agree with that. But I also think that it's incumbent for us to continue to work together with that kind of mindset that we are always going to work on the policies that unite us instead of the rhetoric that divides us. And I know why people utilize rhetoric that divides us. And indeed, sometimes I'm guilty of doing it too. But other people are doing it for the purposes of fundraising appeals and by trying to seem like there's a strategy in political science that suggests that if you are one person running against another, what you should do is draw as sharp of a contrast between yourself and the other person. So you have it's interesting because you have people blaming polarization for that, but that's what political scientists are advocating for people to win races is as sharp of a divide between people as possible. And so that's the advice of what those people are saying. That has nothing to do with polarization or corporations or this or that. So that's something to take note of. Phil said that's always been the answer, but tribal understanding of freedom of association makes progress elusive. It's hard two groups agree to pick up the litter if one keeps calling another a fascist. Well, certainly true, Phil. And that is definitely a major concern. I don't think, I mean, it's kind of like, we'll say, if the analogy here is football teams, right? And if you have two teams that are competing against each other in the midst of the actual game, they may not be friends, but you would hope that at the end of the day, they would come together and help decide upon the things that is going to make the game better for all players. That's what you have in the NFL, and that's something that we should have in our politics. If it's going to be the case that everybody is committed to limited government, then we have to go to the place where there's most agreement. There's most agreement on the administrative state. There's no way that Democrats can justify bureaucrats making decisions unless those people aren't Democrats anymore, which could be true. In which case, I would just ask that they do the honest thing and start a new party, either social the administrative state socialist or the green socialist or something else. But at that point, you're not a Democrat because you don't believe in the people. And you can't say that unelected bureaucrats best know the will of the individual people than what the people and their representatives do. That was the theory that started in the 1920s, that was imported to America by Woodrow Wilson from the German philosopher Hegel. And what we've seen in that time period is that line of thinking could not be more false, that bureaucrats don't know what people want, because nobody said that they wanted 10 million, 10,000, however many rules there are, which nobody knows how many there are because nobody can count them. Nobody wants that many rules by unelected bureaucrats. There was never any consensus around that. These unelected guys just did it when people weren't paying attention because of war, poverty, and then a bunch of other cultural jazz. So I hope that addresses your point there, Phil. You can tell me if it does or doesn't. You can always feel free to come on to the show if you'd like. You can always come on through Zoom sometime. I'll make sure to send you the link. We can always hang out in the chat right there. It's always a cool place to hang out too. So that's all I got, and I will then go to the last topic of discussion. I guess normally I plan for an hour here, but some days that doesn't work, and that's fine. Some days we gotta go to a single thing or a shortened show. So for the shortened show, we'll go to our last subject. a piece that I've written less about than the other three, but something that I think is worth thinking about. A socialist has lazy customers. If we're using this analogy of the marketplace of ideas, then to me, it strikes obvious that in that marketplace of ideas, that socialists are indeed the laziest customers. And perhaps this is in violation of what I said about parties working together to advocate for small government. Who knows? But anyway, what I wanted to say here is in the marketplace of ideas, socialists have bought into cheap thoughts about a fat and bloated government. I think that's true because it's very easy to imagine a utopia where things are free and everybody's happy. It's a very a naive way of looking at things, but it's an easy way. And then you can easily establish that narrative in your mind and wonder why people don't buy into that narrative. But and the end of the day, in the marketplace of ideas, that's one of the easiest things that you could possibly think of. I think every teenager or anybody goes through any kind of existential crisis wonders, well, why can't things be free? Why can't life be easy? This and that. That is such a commonplace thought that it takes no skill to develop. It takes little time to think about. And it's just such an overly simplistic worldview that the marketplace of ideas, if you're buying into that, you're a lazy customer, fundamentally. And this points to other problems in the socialist worldview. If you read Marx or if you read Rawls or other wannabe thinkers, what you'll come to see is that nowhere in any of their works do they ever talk about the joys of creation. They don't talk about how awesome and great it is to make something new and novel. And you would think that if socialists are all about freedom, that they would really celebrate novelty and innovation. But that's nowhere to be discussed in their worldview. For not once in any sentence do they talk about the joy of creating new products, offering innovative services, or the power of crafting some new, great, time saving device. I mean, to think about the joys that people everywhere get when something new is created, both the creator and the people who purchase the product. Man, it's a real solution. In fact, it's so great that now, with all the goods and services and products that are out there, we can have shows like this, and you don't have to go through the corporate media. You don't have to rely on anybody to say that you can or can't have the show. You can just do it anytime. Nor do the socialist philosophies mention anything about volunteering to help the poor or anyone else for that matter. Marketplace of ideas, socialists have bought into cheap thoughts about a fat government for lazy slobs. Now, perhaps that's rhetorically over the top. But truly, if you look at some of these socialist regimes, people aren't out there working. They're not out there talking about the joys of creation or the joys of work. They're not making anything new. It does not appear that they have the intention to. So at the end of the day, I think we can only be led to conclude that marketplace of ideas, they are indeed lazy customers. That's truly all I have for today's show, unless anybody else has anything new. In the meantime, check out zigmundreichenbach.com. That'll take you to my Substack. Type in your email there and press subscribe. So that way, when the newsletters come out, you'll be the first to hear about it. And you do something to enjoy each day. And I know that for me, things that I like that are like the Victor Davis Hanson show gives me something to look forward to. Things like Theo Vaughn's podcast, but there's really never enough great content. And you can have this come to your inbox every Monday through Friday at 9 a.m. and sometimes on Saturday, and have something to enjoy and look forward to, something to think about, which I know Perhaps isn't always in vogue, but I think there is indeed a need. So you can help be on the forefront of human history by being engaged with the critical ideas that we are discussing, the ideas of our time. Nice. It's good to hear from you, Lauren. See that you're on. Good to see you. I don't got much here. In fact, it's just about closing time. But I will indeed hear from you guys again. Again, check out zigmundreichenbach.com to get the latest commentary. And you can support us, help us get out to more people by going to patreon.com/Zigmund Reichenbach. Type in a donation there, and we can use that to get the news out to even more people. That's all I have for you. In the meantime, I hope you have a great day, and we will see you. If you are listening, make sure to tune in Tuesday at 8:30 p.m. I will be coming back from knocking doors in South Carolina, but we are still planning an even bigger show for Tuesday at 8:30 p.m. There, we'll talk about the other pieces that I intend to write. So that's all we got for today. In the meantime, I will see y'all later. Don't forget to like, comment, and share. Till next time, I will see y'all later. Peace.